The fourth thing we need to do if we want to grow in prayer, particularly being able to pray for extended hours, is this. Understand that time spent with God is initially a discipline. So important. It's initially a discipline. And people don't like discipline because discipline is hard. Discipline means you're putting your flesh under, isn't it? In order to grow in a discipline, you need to measure it. So I know that some people are against the whole thing of timing yourself in terms of prayer. They kind of feel like, oh, that's not very personal, that's not very relational. But you know what? If you're not going to measure something, you deceive yourself. I need to measure the time that I spend in prayer because I can pray a very strong prayer, but it's very brief, and I can get out of my prayer closet thinking, I'm very spiritual. That was a powerful time of prayer. And I can deceive myself, delude myself that I'm spending lots of time with the Lord. It's important to measure how long we're actually praying for. It's useful. And when you're building a discipline, you need to be measuring it. You don't get what you can't measure. And we do this in all of life. But it's so interesting that when it comes to prayer, all of a sudden we don't want to. And I think sometimes for some people at a subconscious level, they're scared of what it will reveal. You see, your flesh does not naturally like to pray, right? There are other things your flesh prefers to do. And that's why if you look at Matthew 26, verse 40 to 41, I'm reading from the Berean Study Bible. Then Jesus returned to the disciples and found them sleeping. Were you not able to keep watch with me for 1 hour? He asked Peter. Now watch what he says in verse 41. Watch and pray so that you will not enter into temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Some translations say the flesh is weak. Isn't it interesting? After Jesus challenged the disciples with regards to prayer, he then reveals why it was difficult for them. See, our intentions are good, but our physical body doesn't always follow what our spirit wants. And that's why prayer and building a strong prayer life is a discipline before it's a delight. Discipline is following through with what you have pre-decided is best for you to do despite your emotional state at the time. Powerful. After exercising this discipline for some time, it becomes a habit, and then from there it turns into a delight. A few years ago, I made a decision to pray for a certain time each day, certain time period. And this is important, to pre-decide what your goal is. You can't talk about discipline without talking about goals because you're disciplined in a particular direction. It's not aimless discipline. I like what Paul J. Mayer said about success. He said, success is the progressive realization of predetermined worthwhile personal goals. Success in prayer involves coming to a place of predetermining how long you're going to pray for and how you're going to pray and the type of prayer warrior you want to become. You can't talk about success without talking about goals. By God's grace, I managed to keep that commitment that I had in terms of my daily prayer, the duration of it. Managed to do that for 3 years without fail, whether it was a public holiday, a Sunday, whatever the situation was, a busy day, I managed to do it by God's grace. Now, he didn't allow me to talk at that time about the time period and the duration of my times of prayer. And in prior years, I hadn't always kept my commitment. Sometimes it really felt like a discipline. I didn't always know what to pray about, and sometimes it meant praying at odd hours after having done certain chores. And after a number of weeks of doing that, I'll just be like, okay, let me just relax a little bit. But then God began to help me. And it was interesting because during that 3-year period of consistent daily extended time in prayer, it wasn't always easy. And I would often feel relieved that, okay, I've done my quota of prayer for the day and I can now carry on with other things. Sometimes it felt like that. But you know that all the while I was building my prayer muscle. I was building my prayer muscle. And more recently, I've increased this time period. And yet I find that the grace to pray has also increased. On most days, I end up exceeding the stipulated amount of prayer that I have as a goal. And I find it interesting because God then gives me more space to pray throughout the day. And I now find it a delight. And I'll share with you next week more detail in terms of the actual prayer times and so on. We'll go into it. But I just want to show you that for me, it's been a discipline over the years. When you understand that prayer is initially a discipline, you see the importance of building your prayer muscle, building your staying power to be able to pray for longer periods. I remember in about 2000 and 2001, spending time doing personal prayer crusades. And this is where you spend a week in prayer, increasing the time period each day. So you might pray for 1 hour on the first day, then slightly more on the second, slightly more on day 3, okay? And this is such a powerful reminder that growth in prayer is incremental. You know, sometimes we hear of this person praying for so many hours and we want to be like them because we feel like something is missing in our lives, and then we get discouraged after trying it for a couple of days, okay? So growth is incremental. It's important. We have to run our own race. Run your own race. We're all in different places in our prayer lives. Our starting point is not the same. Some of you grew up in families where there was so much prayer, so it's so natural. Some of you grew up in a prayerless home, and you're starting from the get-go, right? From the beginning to build up your prayer muscles. Many people feel inspired, and then they try to do these quantum leaps, and then they crumble. It's not sustainable. I know from distance running that there is what they call the 10% rule, and it states you should never increase your weekly mileage of running by more than 10% over the previous week. And of course, this protects you from injuries. But I believe that sometimes we need to be protected from spiritual injuries because we're becoming competitive with that person, or we're getting into the flesh. No, don't put that type of pressure on you. Just run your own race and do what there's grace available to do. But make sure you're growing in this area of prayer, which starts off very often as a discipline. I encourage you to also listen to my message on the power of habits and apply it to creating a habit of extended time in prayer. And you can get our messages on YouTube. You can get them on our website, www.gochurch.co.za. Be willing to adjust your lifestyle to make room for prayer. That's a discipline, isn't it? You know, when you live a life of prayer, when prayer is no longer just this thing in the corner of your life, it means you can't spend as much time doing certain things. You know, people don't understand this, I find, that we've only got 24 hours in a day. So you can't be trying to up your prayer life, but still doing every single thing you used to do, right? That time has to come from somewhere, right? I might not be able to watch every single football game that I want to watch because of the amount of time I want to spend each day in prayer. So the question is, are you willing to change? Are you willing to become an early riser, for example? If we're saying, give God your best time, or are you that kind of person who say like, no, for me, I'm not a morning person. I'm just not a morning person. I know people who used to say that a lot until they started having babies. And immediately they became this person who was waking up at 3 a.m. to breastfeed, right? So this thing of labeling ourselves as, I'm not a morning person. I'm not this. I'm not this. Maybe you've got a limited view of yourself. Are you willing to adjust your lifestyle, your TV watching, your oversleeping, right? In this day and age of self-absorption, we need to address these issues.